The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Rivera's penthouse office, each droplet catching the neon glow of San Francisco's financial district. At 35, Marcus had built Nexus Solutions from a garage startup into a billion-dollar tech empire, but success had come at a price. His corner office, with its minimalist design and awards lining the walls, felt more like a gilded cage than a throne room. "Mr. Rivera, you have 3 more meetings today, Rebecca," his assistant announced through the intercom. Her voice carried the efficient warmth that had made her indispensable over the past 5 years. Marcus rubbed his temples, staring at the stack of acquisition proposals on his mahogany desk. Another company to buy, another competitor to absorb. The thrill of the hunt that once drove him had dulled into mechanical routine. He reached for his coffee black. Like everything else in his life lately, when his personal phone buzzed, the number displayed was unfamiliar. But something about the Portland area code made his chest tighten. Marcus hesitated, his finger hovering. Over the screen, business calls came through Rebecca. Personal calls were rare these days. "Hello?" His voice carried the cautious tone of a man who'd learned to expect bad news. Silence stretched across the line, broken only by the sound of someone taking a shaky breath. Then came a voice he'd thought he'd never hear again, soft, familiar, haunted. "Marcus. It's Alina." The phone nearly slipped from his grasp. Alina Vasquez. The woman who'd vanished from his life 10 years ago without explanation, leaving behind only empty drawers and unanswered questions. The woman he'd loved with an intensity that still occasionally woke him in the middle of the night. Alina. Her name felt foreign on his tongue after a decade of silence. ... "How did you get this number?" "I've been following your success," she said, her voice trembling. "Congratulations on everything you've built." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The city sprawled below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives, but suddenly, none of it mattered. "You disappeared, Alina. One day you were there, talking about moving in together." "And the next I know," she interrupted. "No, and I'm sorry, but Marcus, I'm calling because there's something you need to know, something I should have told you years ago." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool glass, watching his breath fog the surface. 10 years of wondering, of building walls around his heart, of telling himself he was better. Off alone, all of it seemed to crumble in the space of her pause. "What is it, Elena?" Another breath, deeper this time, as if she were gathering courage from somewhere deep inside. "You have children, Marcus? Twins, Oliver and Luna? They're 9 years old, and you're their father." The world tilted. Marcus gripped the window frame, his knuckles white against the steel. The rain outside seemed to intensify, matching the storm that had just erupted in his chest. Children. His children. 9 years old. "That's impossible," he whispered, but even as he said it, he was counting backward, remembering their last night together. Passionate, desperate, as if some part of Alina had already been saying goodbye. "I know how it sounds," Alina continued, her voice stronger now. "But I need you to come to Portland. There are things I need to explain, things about why I left." Marcus. ... The children, they need to meet their father. The line went quiet, except for the sound of 2 people breathing 300 miles apart, connected by a truth that had been buried for a decade. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the careful architecture of his solitary life beginning to shift and crack. "Send me your address," he said finally. "I'll be there tomorrow." When the call ended, Marcus remained at the window, watching the rain wash the city clean, preparing for a storm of his own. Dr. Alina Vasquez stood in the sterile corridors of the Portland Medical Research Institute, her white lab coat a stark contrast to the turmoil churning beneath her composed exterior. At 33, she had earned recognition as one of the leading researchers in genetic medicine. But today her hands trembled as she reviewed the latest test results on her tablet. The numbers didn't lie. Her Huntington's-like genetic condition, a rare variant that had claimed her mother's life, was progressing faster than anticipated. The experimental treatments she'd been developing for others couldn't save her from her own cellular rebellion. Dr. Vasquez. Dr. Patricia Williams, her colleague and closest friend at the Institute, reproached with concern etched on her weathered face. "You look pale. Have you been sleeping?" Elena forced a smile, the same mask she'd perfected over the years of hiding her condition from everyone except her medical team. "Just tired." Right. Long night with the twins. Patricia studied her with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd spent 30 years reading between the lines of patient charts and human behavior. "Alina, we've discussed this. You need to consider telling them about your condition. Oliver and Luna are old enough to understand, and they deserve to know why their mother sometimes has to spend nights in the hospital." The mention of her children sent a familiar ache through Elena's chest. Oliver, with his serious dark eyes and insatiable curiosity about how things worked so much like Marcus, it sometimes took her breath away. Luna, fierce and protective, who'd appointed herself the family's guardian at age 5 and never relinquished the role, I called him, Elena said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. Patricia's eyebrows rose. "The father?" Elena nodded, sinking into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs that lined the hallway. "Marcus. I called him last night, after 10 years of silence." "Elena, what prompted the latest scans?" Elena interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You saw them? Both know what they mean." Patricia sat beside her, her expression softening. "The progression is concerning, yes, but we've discussed experimental options. The gene therapy trials show promise, 30% success rate." Elena cut her off. "And that's being optimistic." "Patricia, I need to face reality. If something happens to me, Oliver and Luna can't go to foster care. They need their father." The drive home to her modest craftsman house in the Alberta district felt longer than usual. Elena's mind wandered to the night she'd fled San Francisco. 3 positive pregnancy tests hidden in her purse, and a diagnosis that felt like a death sentence. She'd stood in Marcus's apartment, watching him sleep, memorizing the curve of his jaw and the way his hair fell across his forehead. Leaving had been the hardest thing she'd ever done, but staying would have been selfish. How could she burden him with a relationship destined for heartbreak? How could she trap him with children he might have to raise alone? "Mom, you're making that face again," Luna observed from the kitchen table, where she was helping Oliver with his math homework. At 9, Luna possessed an emotional intelligence that sometimes unnerved Elena. Her daughter's auburn hair, Marcus's color, caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "What face?" Lena asked, hanging her keys on the hook by the door. "The face you make when you're thinking about sad things," Oliver chimed in without looking up from his fractions. His analytical nature, inherited from both parents, made him observant in ways that often surprised adults. Elena joined them at the table, ruffling Oliver's dark hair that was an exact match for the man who would arrive tomorrow. "Some news. Someone special is coming to visit us." Both children looked up with interest. Their world had always been small, but complete. Elena. Their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who watched them when Elena worked late, and a handful of close friends from school and the research institute. "Who?" Luna asked, her protective instincts immediately activated. Elena took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Your father? His name is Marcus, and he's coming from San Francisco to meet you." The silence that followed was profound. Oliver's pencils stopped moving across his worksheet. Luna's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion. "Our father Oliver," repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. "You mean the person who contributed half our DNA?" Lena almost smiled despite the gravity of the moment. Clova had been asking scientific questions about reproduction since he was 6, approaching the concept of an absent father with the same methodical curiosity he applied to everything else. "Yes," she said simply. "Why now?" Luna demanded, her voice carrying an edge of protectiveness that reminded Elena painfully of Marcus. "Why didn't he want to meet us before?" "There are things about the past that I need to explain to both of you. But I want you to know that he's a good man, and he didn't know about you until yesterday." As Elena helped them finish homework and prepare dinner, she caught both children stealing glances at her, their minds clearly spinning with questions they weren't ready to voice. Later that evening, after they'd gone to bed, she stood in her small home office, looking at the photograph she'd kept hidden in her desk drawer for 10 years. Marcus, at 25, laughing at something she'd said, his arm around her shoulders. At a company picnic, they'd been so young, so certain that love could conquer anything. She traced his face with her finger, wondering how much he'd changed, whether success had hardened him or if she'd still see glimpses of the man who used to stay up all night talking about changing the world. Tomorrow, two worlds would collide. The life she'd built in careful isolation and the love she'd never quite managed to forget. Asterisk. The rental car's GPS announced Marcus had arrived at his destination, but he remained gripping the steering wheel in the driveway of the modest craftsman house. Through the windshield, he studied the home Alina had built without him, a world of garden beds filled with winter vegetables, a tire swing hanging from an ancient oak tree, and two bicycles leaning against the front porch, his children's bicycles. The thought still felt surreal, like words in a foreign language he was trying to learn. Marcus had rehearsed this moment during the entire flight from San Francisco, but now, faced with the reality of walking up those front steps, his carefully planned words dissolved into nervous energy. The front door opened before he could knock. Alina appeared, and Marcus felt the decade between them collapse in an instant. She was thinner than he remembered, her dark hair now shoulder-length and streaked with premature silver. But her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had haunted his dreams, remained unchanged. Double quotes, "Hello, Marcus." Her voice carried the same gentle strength, he remembered, though he could detect tremor beneath the surface. Alina. He wanted to say more, to demand answers or express the anger he'd nursed for years, but the complexity of seeing her again rendered him speechless. "They're inside," she said, stepping back to let him enter. "I should warn you, Luna's been interrogating me since breakfast about your intentions." And Oliver's prepared what he calls paternal assessment questions. Despite his nerves, Marcus almost smiled. "They sound like your children." "Yours too," Alina replied softly. The living room was warm and lived in, with mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. Bookshelves overflowing with everything from children's literature to advanced medical, textbooks, and artwork that could only have been created by young hands covering the refrigerator. It was everything Marcus's sterile penthouse was in a home filled with life and love, the beautiful chaos of family. Two children stood in the doorway leading to what appeared to be the kitchen, studying him with an intensity that made Marcus feel like a specimen under a microscope. The girl Luna had Elena's delicate features but his auburn hair, which she wore in two neat braids. The boy over was unmistakably his son. From the dark hair that fell across his forehead to the serious expression that Marcus recognized from his own childhood photographs. "So you're our biological father," Oliver said, approaching with the clinical directness of a young scientist. He extended his hand formally. "I'm Oliver Vasquez. I have questions." Marcus shook his son's hand, marveling at the firm grip and direct eye contact. "I'm Marcus Rivera. I'd be disappointed if you didn't have questions." Luna remained by the doorway, arms crossed, clearly the more skeptical of the two. "Why didn't you know about us?" she demanded, her voice carrying an accusatory edge that made Marcus's chest tighten. Elena warned gently, but Marcus held up a hand. "It's okay. She has every right to ask." He looked directly at Luna, recognizing the protective fierceness in her stance. "I didn't know because your mother and I lost touch before she knew she was pregnant. If I had known, I would have been here from the beginning." "Prove it," Luna challenged. Marcus blinked, taken aback by the direct confrontation from a 9-year-old. "How would you like me to prove it?" Oliver stepped forward, clearly the diplomat of the pair. "Luna means we need to assess your character and intentions. We've never had a father figure, so we're naturally cautious about accepting someone new into our family structure." The formal language coming from a child was both endearing and heartbreaking. Marcus glanced at Alina, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of pride and apprehension. "That's completely reasonable," Marcus said, settling into the chair. Alina gestured toward. "What would you like to know?" For the next hour, Marcus found himself in the most unusual job interview of his life. Oliver's questions were methodical and thorough. What was his profession? Did he have any criminal history? What were his views on education and discipline? Had he ever been married? Why not? Luna's approach was more emotional and direct. Did he plan to hurt their mother again? Would he disappear if things got difficult? Did he actually want to be a father? Or was he just here out of obligation? Some questions were easier to answer than others. Marcus spoke about his company, his work ethic, his belief in education and treating children with respect. But when Luna asked why he'd never married, he found himself looking at Alina. "I suppose I never found the right person," he said carefully. "Or maybe I did, but the timing wasn't right." The afternoon progressed with Alina suggesting they all go to nearby Laurelhurst Park. As they walked the tree-lined paths, Marcus observed his children with growing fascination. Oliver pointed out different bird species and explained the ecological significance of the park's old-growth trees. Luna challenged Marcus to a race across the meadow, then grudgingly admitted he was faster than expected for someone who sits at a desk all day. At the playground, Marcus pushed both children on the swings, their laughter creating a soundtrack he'd never known he'd been missing. When Oliver asked if he could show Marcus his rock collection, and Luna shyly inquired whether he knew any good knock-knock jokes, Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Luna surprised him by slipping her small hand into his. "You seem okay," she announced with the solemness of a judge rendering a verdict, "but we're still evaluating you." "That's fair," Marcus replied, gently squeezing her hand. "I'm still evaluating myself." Oliver walked on his other side, chattering about a science project on renewable energy. "Maybe you could help me with the technical aspects? Mom knows a lot about biology and medicine, but your technology background might be useful for the engineering components." "I'd love to help," Marcus said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in years, as they headed back to Elena's house. Marcus caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, hope mixed with fear, love tempered by years of careful protection. "They're remarkable," he told her quietly while the children ran ahead to investigate something Oliver had spotted in the grass. "They are," Elena agreed. "Marcus, there are things we need to discuss. About the past, about why I left, about tomorrow," Marcus interrupted gently. "Tonight, I just want to get to know them. The rest can wait until tomorrow." But as he watched his children racing toward the house they called home, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Alina was holding back something important. Something that would change everything once again. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp Portland drizzle, made everything look softer around the edges. Marcus had spent a restless night in his downtown hotel, his mind cycling through fragments of conversation with Oliver and Luna, trying to piece together not just who his children were, but who he might become as their father. Alina had asked him to return early, before the children woke up. "We need to talk," she'd said. Something in her tone suggested this conversation would be more difficult than yesterday's careful introductions. He found her in the kitchen, already dressed, but moving with a careful precision that seemed unnatural. She poured 2 cups of coffee, with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. And Marcus noticed the pill organizer on the counter, the kind used by people managing complex medical conditions. "Sit down, Marcus," Elena said. "Ish," her voice carrying the weight of someone about to confess something that had been buried too long. They settled at the same kitchen table where he'd met his children yesterday. But this morning, the cheerful chaos of homework and breakfast remnants had been replaced by a manila folder Alina placed between them. "Before I tell you anything else, I need you to understand something," she began, her fingers worrying the edge of the folder. "When I left San Francisco, when I disappeared from your life, it wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I loved you too much to destroy you." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Lena, nothing could have been worse than you just vanishing. Do you know what that did to me? I spent months thinking I'd done something wrong, that I'd somehow driven you away." "I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. But Marcus, 3 days before I left, I found out I was pregnant. And 2 days before that, I'd received test results that changed everything." She opened the folder, revealing medical documents, genetic analysis reports, and what appeared to be a family medical history. Marcus recognized some of the terminology from his company's work in medical technology. but the specific details were beyond his expertise. I have a rare genetic condition, Elena continued, her voice steadying as she shifted into the clinical tone he remembered from her graduate school days. It's similar to Huntington's disease, but with some key differences. It's progressive. It affects motor function and cognitive ability, and it's ultimately fatal. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the medical reports, trying to process what she was telling him. When you say ultimately fatal, the progression varies. Some people have decades of relatively normal life. Others decline rapidly. My mother died when I was 16, which is why I was tested in the first place. Elena's voice remained steady, but Marcus could see the effort it cost her. When I found out I was pregnant, I was 23 years old, terrified, and facing the possibility that I might not live to see my children grow up. Marcus pushed back from the table, needing space to absorb this revelation. So you decided to handle it alone? Elena, we could have faced this together, could we? She challenged, and for the first time he heard anger in her voice. Marcus, you were 25, building your career, full of dreams about changing the world. What would you have done if I'd told you I was pregnant with twins and might die before they turned 10? Would you have stayed out of love or obligation? And if you'd stayed, would you have resented me when the reality of caregiving replaced the romance? The questions hung between them like accusations. Marcus wanted to protest, to insist he would have stayed for the right reasons, but the brutal honesty in Elena's eyes forced him to confront his younger self, ambitious, impatient, convinced that love could overcome anything because he'd never been tested by real adversity. I don't know, he admitted finally. I'd like to think I would have been there for you. But you're right, I was young and stupid and probably would have handled it badly. Elena's expression softened slightly. Made the decision I thought would protect everyone. I moved to Portland, got into the medical research program here, and specialized in genetic diseases. I thought if I couldn't cure myself, maybe I could contribute to treatments that would help others. And the children? Are they ... Genetic testing shows they're not carriers, Elena said quickly, understanding his fear. They're healthy, Marcus. Whatever happens to me, they'll be fine. Marcus sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of emotions swirling through him, relief about his children's health, anger at the lost decade, admiration for Elena's strength, and a growing dread about what her current condition meant. He said, whatever happens to me, he said carefully. Elena, how are you now? Really? She hesitated, then pulled out another set of test results. The disease is progressing faster than we hoped. I've been part of experimental treatment protocols, but the latest scans show significant deterioration. Dr. Williams, my colleague, thinks I have maybe 2 years of relatively normal function left. The coffee cup in Marcus's hand suddenly felt too heavy. 2 years. After 10 years of separation, he was being offered 2 years to be part of this family he'd never known existed. Is that why you called me now? Elena nodded. I realized I was being selfish again, but in the opposite direction. I thought I was protecting Oliver and Luna by not telling them about their father, but they deserve to know you. And if something happens to me, they need family who will love them. Before Marcus could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Oliver appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair sticking up at odd angles, followed by Luna, who had clearly been eavesdropping, based on the guilty expression on her face. Mom, Oliver said with his characteristic directness, are you sick? Elena looked at Marcus, a question in her eyes. He nodded, understanding that this conversation needed to include all of them. Come here, both of you, Elena said, opening her arms. As her children settled on either side of her, she looked at Marcus over their heads. Yes, sweetheart. I am sick, but I'm getting the best treatment possible, and we're going to make sure you're both taken care of, no matter what happens. Fierce protectiveness immediately activated. Are you going to die like Grandma Rose did? The question that had haunted Elena for years, now voiced by her 9-year-old daughter with heartbreaking directness. I don't know, Luna. I hope not for a very long time. But that's one of the reasons I wanted you to meet your father, so you'd know that you have family who loves you. Oliver, ever the analytical one, looked directly at Marcus. So this isn't just a visit. You're here because we might need you. The weight of responsibility of instant parenthood, of becoming the backup plan for a family in crisis, it should have terrified Marcus. Instead, looking at these two remarkable children and the woman who had carried this burden alone for a decade, he felt something he'd never experienced in all his business success, a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. "I'm here because you're my children," Marcus said simply, "and because I should have been here all along." 6 weeks later, Marcus found himself in the sterile waiting room of Portland General Hospital, watching Oliver methodically work through a Sudoku puzzle while Luna paced the small space like a caged tiger. The surgery had been scheduled after. Elena's condition deteriorated more rapidly than anyone anticipated, tremors that made her morning coffee cup rattle against the saucer, episodes of confusion that left her staring blankly at research she'd written herself. "How much longer?" Luna asked for the 5th time in an hour, her voice tight with anxiety. Marcus checked his watch.
Dr. Williams said 4 to 6 hours for the experimental gene therapy procedure.
"We're at hour 3? The success rate is still only 30%, Oliver stated matter-of-factly. Well, Marcus had learned to recognize the worry hidden beneath his son's clinical observations. But Mom's research contributed to refining the technique so her specific case might have better odds. Marcus marveled, not for the first time, at how these children processed fear, Luna through movement and demands for action, Oliver through facts and analysis. Both approaches reminded him painfully of Elena, who had spent the past weeks systematically organizing their lives for every possible outcome. The manila folders she'd prepared sat in Marcus's hotel room, custody documents, medical histories, school records, lists of Luna's friends and Oliver's extracurricular activities, detailed instructions about bedtime routines and food preferences. She'd approached potential single parenthood with the same methodical precision she brought to her research, except Marcus could see the terror she tried to hide behind her organizational skills. "Mr. Rivera." Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway, still wearing surgical scrubs. Her expression was carefully neutral, the practiced mask of someone who delivered life-changing news regularly. Marcus stood immediately, his heart hammering against his ribs. Oliver looked up from his puzzle, and Luna stopped pacing mid-step. "The surgery went well," Dr. Williams continued, and Marcus felt his knees go weak with relief. "We were able to deliver the gene therapy to the targeted areas, and Elena's vital signs remained stable throughout the procedure." "But," Luna demanded, reading the hesitation in the doctor's tone. Dr. Williams smiled slightly at Luna's directness. "But we won't know if the treatment is effective for several weeks. Elena's body needs time to process the genetic modifications and begin producing the corrected proteins. She'll be unconscious for the next 12 to 24 hours while we monitor for complications." "Can we see her?" Oliver asked, closing his puzzle book with precise movements. "In a few hours? Yes. She's in intensive care right now, but once she's moved to a recovery room, you can visit." The next 18 hours blurred together in a haze of hospital coffee, whispered conversations, and the surreal experience of maintaining normal routines in abnormal circumstances. Marcus called his assistant Rebecca to cancel the rest of his week, then found himself helping Luna with math homework in a hospital cafeteria while Oliver researched gene therapy success rates on Marcus's laptop. As she worked through a particularly challenging word problem, "If Mom gets better, are you going back to San Francisco?" The question Marcus had been avoiding crystallized in the fluorescent lit space between them. Over the past 6 weeks, he'd been commuting between Portland and San Francisco, trying to manage his company remotely while building relationships with his children. It was an unsustainable arrangement, and everyone knew it. "What would you like me to do?" he asked carefully. "Stay," Oliver said without looking up from the laptop. "Statistically speaking, children with 2 involved parents have better outcomes across multiple metrics. But also, we like having you here." Luna nodded emphatically. "Plus, Mom's happier when you're around. She thinks we don't notice, but she smiles more and forgets to check her medical alerts as often." The casual observation hit Marcus like a revelation. He'd been so focused on the logistics of potential parenthood that he'd almost overlooked the simple truth. He was happier here, too. The past 6 weeks, despite their uncertainty and stress, had felt more meaningful than the previous decade of professional success, when they were finally allowed to see Elena. She was awake but groggy, connected to monitors that beeped reassuringly. Her face lit up when the children entered, and Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest as he watched his family reconnect. "How do you feel, Mom?" Luna asked, taking Elena's hand with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Like I've been taken apart and put back together," Elena replied, her voice hoarse but alert, but hopeful. "Dr. Williams says the preliminary indicators are promising." Over the following days, as Elena's strength returned in the early test, results showed encouraging signs. Marcus made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. He called an emergency board meeting via video conference from Elena's hospital room. "I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations," he announced. To his startled board members, "I'll remain as chairman, but I'm appointing Jennifer as CEO and moving my primary residence to Portland." The questions and protests from the board faded into background noise as he watched Elena's surprised expression transform into something that looked like joy. 3 months later, on a surprisingly sunny March afternoon, Marcus stood in the Portland Botanical Garden with Oliver as his best man and Luna as Elena's maid of honor. The ceremony was small Dr. Williams and her partner, Marcus's brother David, who flew in from Chicago, Mrs. Chen from next door, and a handful of colleagues from Elena's research institute. Elena had insisted they wait until her test results showed sustained improvement before making any major decisions. "I won't have you marrying me out of pity or obligation," she'd said with characteristic directness. But as Marcus watched her walk toward him through the blooming cherry trees, wearing a simple blue dress and carrying a bouquet Luna had helped arrange, he knew this decision had nothing to do with her illness and everything to do with the life they could build together. Father Miguel, the hospital chaplain who had counseled them through Elena's recovery, kept the ceremony brief but meaningful. When Marcus and Elena exchanged ring-simple bands they'd chosen together at a local jewelry store, Oliver wiped his eyes with scientific precision while Luna openly sobbed with happiness. "You may kiss the bride, Father," Miguel announced. And as Marcus leaned down to kiss Elena, he heard Luna stage whisper to Oliver, "Finally, I thought they'd never figure it out." The reception was held in Elena's backyard, where Marcus had spent the past month helping the children plant a vegetable garden. As the sun set over their small celebration, Marcus found himself standing with Elena near the newly installed swing set, watching Oliver explain the aerodynamics of the tire swing to Dr. Williams while Luna organized an impromptu dance contest with the other guests. "Any regrets?" Elena asked, leaning against his shoulder. Marcus thought about his old life, the penthouse office, the constant travel, the hollow satisfaction of financial success. Then he looked at his children, his wife, the modest house that had become more of a home than anywhere he'd ever lived. "Only one," he said, tightening his arms around Elena, "that we lost 10 years we could have had together. But we have now," Elena replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had faced death and chosen life. "We have right now, and hopefully many more nows to come." As if summoned by their conversation, Oliver and Luna ran over, grass stains on their formal clothes and joy written across their faces. "Group hug," Luna demanded, and as they all embraced in the gathering twilight, Marcus realized he'd finally found what he'd been searching for without knowing it: a love worth changing everything for, and a family worth coming home to. In the distance, the city lights of Portland began to twinkle like promises, and Marcus, Rivero, successful businessman, reluctant romantic, and brand new father-husband, had never felt richer in his life.